Yes, good morning. Welcome to the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. It's Thursday, the 17th of September, 2020. My name is Pete Fairbairn. I'm your host. And as always, I'm joined by a brilliant raconteur from within the sports journalism fraternity. Today, it's none other than Christy Doran in Sydney. How are you, Sea-Doors?
Very well, mate. Good to join, and nice to know that we dress the same and we wake up and we think it's a great colour. You're looking good.
Mate, and to you, you got the lumberjack look going on very well indeed. Very impressive. Mate, we're going to start in rugby union in your neck of the woods with a pretty big story from John Stensholt in the Australian today that seems to have come really from left field, and it's regarding the Rugby Australia broadcasting rights. Of course, we know that the deal with Fox Sports and Network 10 comes to a conclusion at the end of 2020. Depending on which reports you want to believe, there's been varying degrees of interest by Optus Sports in becoming involved with broadcasting that. We know Foxtel CEO Patrick Delaney has made a comment recently about his organisation only looking to support Tier 1 sports, and he named a number of sports that included. It didn't include rugby union. We know there's a lot of pressure on the sport from an economic standpoint, and that there is that great amount of uncertainty. So much of it, not the fault of anybody, but COVID-related due to the future of Super Rugby beyond 2020. But John Stensholt reporting today that rugby union may get a financial lifeline from an unusual and potentially groundbreaking source, Nine Network and its online streaming service, Stan. It's understood that Nine have entered discussions with Rugby Australia about a potential broadcast deal that would see Wallabies matches telecast on Nine's free-to-air channel and Super Rugby games mostly or only shown on Stan. This one's come from left field, Christy. How important is it to get a broadcast deal secured as soon as possible, and how exciting are the reports of potential interest from this new party?
Well, we'll start with the latter question first of all. It is exciting because you need that competitive tension, which is something that Raylene Castle was hoping to achieve earlier in the year. Competitive tension, therefore driving the value of the dollar up. Unfortunately, that didn't occur with COVID really interfering with that. But how much of this you can believe? We understand that the test matches would probably be played on Channel 9. Channel 9 hosted some of the broadcast rights in 2015 with the World Cup. So they have shown rugby union in the past. But whether or not the Super Rugby matches are played on Channel 9 or Stan, obviously the preference would be on Channel 9, but you're taking it to an online streaming platform is really interesting. We've seen it now with the Six Nations, the Eight Nations going to be picked up by the Prime up in the north, so it's not now uncharted territory. As for getting it wrapped up as sooner rather than later, it is extremely important because programs, players need to have some future, some clarity about where they're going to be. The governing body needs to work out where it sees the future. Whether or not Super Rugby games can have a bit of a trans-Tasman element, even despite the COVID period. And I think that the most likelihood scenario there would be to have your regular seasons and then perhaps even a seeding right at the end where you have first play 10th or first play 8th and second 7th, vice versa. And it could be a quarterfinal simple knockout where you could even play it in a hub area and get these games out really quickly, but it would have a brilliant trans-Tasman element and flavour to it before, hopefully, morphing into a fully integrated trans-Tasman comp from 2022.
Or in my mind, I'm going to take it a step further and say Trans-Pacific, because I'm determined to hope for a future that does incorporate, the dollars, but also the feverish support for the game in Japan off the back of the Rugby World Cup last year. And I think it'd be great also to have Pacific Island representation in that future competition. I think we've seen it both Super Rugby Aotearoa and Super Rugby AU. We've seen some great footy on display. We've seen that fans of the game have loved it. But what we need to see is new audiences come into the sport as well, and potentially a brand new broadcast partner willing to try some innovation and potentially some new voices involved in broadcasting that game. I think it's a really exciting development, and we know Johnny Stensholt, he's a man in the know when it comes to the business of sport. So certainly I'd be taking the reports fairly seriously.
And one last comment on that is that with Channel 9 and the Sydney Morning Herald having a very close relationship, the Wide World of Sports website would have great content that would probably be able to be put up on the site, given the Herald has a couple of fine journalists, and Georgina Robertson, Tom Decent, Sam Phillips, all covering rugby very well indeed. So it would be a pretty simple way to be able to get more content out, which is only a good thing for rugby.
Could we see the day where Tom Decent's coming to us from the sideline at Suncorp Stadium? Stranger things have happened. We're going to stay with rugby union for our second story. Of course, we do have the Super Rugby AU Grand Final this weekend in Canberra on Saturday night, with the Brumbies hosting the Reds. And Jamie Pandaram in the Daily Telegraph sat down for a really good conversation with Brumbies head coach Dan McKellar. McKellar's been a revelation really at that club since moving up from an assistant's role from when he served underneath Stephen Larkham, taking on the head coach's role a couple of years ago. The Brumbies clearly been the best Australian team for a number of years now. And some of the quotes here I really like from McKellar. We want our program to be considered equal to your Leinsters, Saracens and Crusaders. Obviously probably the three most outstanding successful rugby teams of the last decade globally. For us to achieve that, we've got to have this attitude and desire to be world-class. The only way we're going to do that is by wanting to get better every day. You have that attitude and back it up with really good work ethic, you're a chance of getting there. And our message this year from the very first meeting we had was, how are we going to get better every day? The article goes on to look at some of the roster, some of the losses of really experienced Wallabies that McKellar's had to contend with, guys moving overseas. It also looks at how he's managed to get the best out of guys like Ira Simone, Tom Wright, some of these people who are perhaps unsung heroes or lesser names, which is very consistent with what the Brumbies have done throughout their 25-year professional history. Reading this article, Christy, my overwhelming thought was, Dan McKellar's got to be the next Wallabies coach. Here's a man at the top of his game who is improving players and not resting on his laurels and determined to be the very best he can be. Do you think he is the next Wallabies coach after Dave Rennie? And do you think his Brumbies will win the Super Rugby AU Premiership on Saturday?
Oh, it's quite funny when we're talking about who the next Wallabies coach might be when the new incoming Wallabies coach hasn't actually coached the Wallabies just yet and hasn't even got his mitts on them. That's years down the track. I think it would be at least 4 years. But what an outstanding thing that would be to have an Australian coach, hopefully leading into a 2027 Home World Cup, leading the Wallabies charge. Will he get there one day? He might well, that's for sure. He tore up the playbook under Stephen Larkham, tried to reinvent them, and I think he's done an outstanding job. Interesting that he quoted Saracens and Leinster. These are two clubs that Dan McKellar's done some personal development at, spending time with them, spending time with England and Eddie Jones as well. So he's a guy that continually looks to try to make himself better as a coach, and he's not afraid to ask questions, which is great. Can the Brumbies win? Well, they're minor premiers. Will they win? The Reds, I think, are the team that are actually in form at the moment. But speaking to Rod Kafer earlier in the week, you don't always want to play all your cards throughout the season, and even indeed a couple of weeks ago when they played the Reds. So off the back of a bye, the Brumbies are going to be fit, they're going to be fresh, and they're going to come up against a side that has very little finals experience, and they'll be playing in Canberra in their back door. It's an easier route for the Brumbies, and on that evidence alone, I think they've won 16 of their last 17 games or so in Canberra as well. So I would tip the Brumbies, but only just. It should be a great game anyway. The Reds are playing some really lovely counter-attacking rugby.
Yeah, and I was at Suncorp Stadium on Saturday for that Reds win over the Rebels, and someone who really stood out in that match was Filippo Daungunu, not only for his attacking prowess, but also defensively, what he brought to that Reds team. A couple of nice problems for Dan McKellar in that he's got the likes of Tom Cusack and Noah Lolesio potentially pushing for inclusion, having come back from injury, choosing his 23 for that one. And we know McKellar does a wonderful job of using his full squad and making sure it's a next man up mentality. So that'll be really interesting to see who he picks for that one in just a few hours' time this morning. Our third story today, we turn to Fox Sports and an article from Matt Barmer looking at the AFL and the shocked GWS coach, Leon Cameron, he's revealed how shocked he was after defender Aidan Corr walked out on the club. I think that language is a bit strong as I paraphrase here, but Aidan Corr's elected to exercise his free agency rights and return to Victoria with the out-of-contract back set to join North Melbourne for 2021 and beyond. He's been at the Giants for 8 years. He's played 98 matches, including an AFL Grand Final, and been a very solid performer and contributor for that football club. The scenario with the Giants, we know that they need a big win over St Kilda and some other things to go their way this weekend if they're to sneak into the 8. Corr himself is injured, has an ankle injury and wouldn't be available to play for 3 or even 4 weeks. So unlikely to feature again in Giants colours. And with all that in mind, it sounds like Leon Cameron and Aidan Corr have made a mutual decision for him to depart the hub environment. I want to ask you more broadly, Christy, does the AFL, the clubs, the players, or not so much the players, but certainly the clubs, they need to grow up a little bit when it comes to players announcing their future intentions and the fact that they may play for another club next year, and let them stay in the environment and be the professionals they are and finish the season anyway. I mean, surely this would be fairly distracting to Corr's teammates who've gone into battle with him so many times over the years and have a must-win game this weekend to see him departing the hub.
I think we see, because of the AFL competition and the draft nature of it, you see a lot of players that get drafted and then they stay there right throughout their careers. You look at the competition of the NRL, and there's players continually leaving and going between clubs. You don't quite get that same transfer window, I think, in AFL. It's strange, and it can be disruptive to lose players, particularly experienced guys that have been there for a long time. To leave this late when you've got a pretty big game coming up against St Kilda to try to nab the last spot in the top 8. This is a side, the GWS, which has had some success, relative success, without winning a major since history and their surge in the last 3 or 4 years. But yeah, it would be disruptive to lose someone at this late stage, someone who's a fullback, who's the defensive kind of at the forefront of the defence of GWS. So yeah, I am surprised. Some of the language around it is a little bit concerning. But these are weird times in coronavirus periods where perhaps a player who's devastated, who might not be there right until the end, wants to go home, wants to see his family. So you can perhaps understand that too.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a lot of scuttlebutt around GWS, and they have re-signed their coach, Leon Cameron, for 2 more years, but a lot of murmurings that perhaps he's missed out on that golden generation of talent there and their opportunity to win a premiership. I compare it to something like the NRL, where you've got Penrith absolutely flying, top of the ladder. James Tarmo, their captain, wonderful servant of that club, but expected to announce in the next few days that as part of their salary cap squeeze and their desire to bring through the next crop of youngsters, that he'll sign a 2-year deal with the West Tigers. I don't envisage that having any issue or any impact on Penrith's push for the premiership this year. But they are different codes.
It's easier when you're first, isn't it, though, when you're flying in the charge and you've come from nowhere, really, the Panthers.
Yeah, it's a decent point you make. Staying in rugby league for our 4th story now from Dean Ritchie in the Daily Telegraph. And he's got, he says, finally the Central Coast of New South Wales could have its own full-time NRL side. News Corp can reveal the majority of New Zealand Warriors players have told their club of a strong desire to return full-time to Terrigal on the New South Wales Central Coast if they need to be based in Australia for next season's NRL Premiership. That's despite the club negotiating with Redcliffe in Queensland, which would be significantly cheaper for the club to be based in Redcliffe. The players want to stay on the New South Wales Central Coast. The stipulations they put to the club is that families must travel and stay with the players. That's a non-negotiable. They want to live in apartments and homes throughout the Central Coast community as opposed to a hotel. They also want to relocate some of the staff from head office in New Zealand, and I guess they want to be able to be a part of that community and lay down some roots for the season, as opposed to the number of months and the huge sacrifices they've made this year. I want to take it a step further, Christy. I mean, you've got players who signed contracts with that football club believing they'd be based in Auckland. Yes, they've got a lot of Aussies in there and people with family in New South Wales, but as a general rule, if they were to come back and spend a whole another year living in a different part of the world and, being away from home, is this just more evidence that this is the greatest sacrifice we've seen from any team in any code to keep things running since COVID broke out?
Since COVID broke out, yeah, absolutely. I thought you were going to go there for forever. But in modern times, it's an extraordinary sacrifice that they've done. You think about even sides like the Melbourne Rebels or the Western Force, who have had to have spent the last 3 months over on the eastern seaboard. The Rebels had 24 hours to basically get out of Melbourne and then haven't been able to return back until last weekend. Huge sacrifice, and yes, it's different if you're forced upon this and you've got to think on your feet. The NRL now has got a number of months to work out what the best protocol here is. I see that being a reasonable request, really. The NRL with 16 sides, if it didn't have the Warriors in there, they wouldn't be able to get the 8 rounds that they regularly get in there. The Warriors perhaps in a position of strength to ask for more than the other clubs, but fair enough, they're keeping the competition alive as well. They're 3 hours by plane away from friends and family in New Zealand. A huge sacrifice, and if you're going to be doing it for more than half a year, that's a long time. You don't sign up to join the Warriors to be on the road for 6 months without your friends and family. That wasn't part of their contracts when they signed up initially, and it's hard to encourage and entice players to join the Warriors given those circumstances. And without a vaccine as well, you never know. It might linger into 2022 too.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful sacrifice, and hopefully, with that few months of planning time ahead, the NRL, the Warriors and the players can come to an agreement that everybody's happy with. Our final story today, and we do only have a couple of minutes, but it's the US Open Golf this week. It's been 20 years since Tiger Woods won his first US Open by 15 strokes, which remains the largest margin of victory in the event. This is as Bill Pennington in the New York Times tells us. And it's been 12 years since he last won the US Open. And how's this for a sense of irony? That year he needed a 19-hole playoff to defeat a 45-year-old with a creaky back in Rocco Mediati. This year, Tiger Woods is a 45-year-old with a creaky back that's been surgically repaired 4 times. He comes into this tournament with not a lot of golf behind him and not a lot of good form. And just to throw another spanner in the works, Winged Foot Golf Club, where the tournament's being played, is known by many as the hardest golf course on the planet. Let that one sink in for a moment. Not a great place to go if your body's letting you down and your form's not fantastic. Aussie Jeff Ogilvy won back there in 2006 by shooting a 5 over. As we head into this weekend at the US Open, or tomorrow at the US Open, Christy, what should we be expecting from Tiger Woods?
Well, he's played 6 times, I think, this year, and his best result is a 9th place. He's missed the top 50 on a couple of occasions as well. So he doesn't have a hell of a lot of form to go on the back of. Didn't do too well at the US PGA just recently either. So what can we expect? Well, we're not quite sure, but Tiger Woods obviously is going to generally draw a gallery. It was interesting that Justin Thomas was saying that he's not going to have anyone there because we can't have fans at the US Open this year. But it was funny, like a bloke who was 4 or 5 when Tiger Woods started playing is now going to be playing alongside him. So there's some beautiful storylines right throughout it. But in terms of the rough there at Winged Foot, it's amazing that I've seen a little bit of footage of a couple of TV reporters putting an Arnold Palmer can and a really big one, a supersized one, in some of the rough. And you can't even see the top of the Arnold Palmer can because it is so thick. And if you're going 12, 15 foot outside of the fairway, good luck finding your ball. There's expected to be a lot of players that lose balls. You've only got a few minutes to find your ball now. So, it could be a high-scoring affair in New York. It's going to be great. It's exciting. We've got a couple of Aussies that are in form as well, with Jason Day and Adam Scott finding some form recently too.
Yeah, Jason Day, the one to watch for mine from an Aussie perspective. Tony Finau is a guy who comes in really good form and has shown the mental aptitude to perform well in Masters in majors, and you're going to need that on a course this challenging. And of course, Dustin Johnson comes in ridiculously good form, but he's been playing.
So crucial to find the fairways here, though. So someone like Adam Scott, who's great off the tee, that's really, you just got to be finding the fairway. People like Jason Day, Ken Sprade at times off the tee, such big power hitters, guys that blast the ball. So being able to hit the fairway is crucial.
Which unfortunately is not been Tiger's strong point in 2020. We know that his recovery game is about as good as it gets, but it will need to be at its very, very best for him to contend. I just hope he makes the cut. I want to see him playing 4 days, and I think that'd be a good result. Christy, that's all we've got time for today. Fantastic to catch up. Love having you on the Best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. You told me the Brumbies are going to win on Saturday. How many points are they going to win by?
5 points.
5 points to the Brumbies on Saturday. Christy Doran, thanks for being on the show. Look forward to catching up with you again very soon.